Today, Mississippi's attempt to deport black U.S. citizens. The Washington Post has an article on the vote by the Mississippi legislature to create a colony in Africa where its black population could be sent. The date of this vote is incredible. February 20th, 1922. 100 years ago, the Mississippi State Senate voted to evict the state's black residents. That's the majority of the total population. But not just out of Mississippi, but out of the country. The Senate voted 25-9 on February 20th, 1922, to ask the federal government to trade some of the World War I debts owed by European countries for a piece of colonial Africa. Any part would do. The government would then ship Mississippi's black residents, creating a final home for the American Negro. The act is a reminder of just how long after the end of slavery some white Southerners were pushing, not just to strip African Americans of their political rights, but also to remove them from the land of their birth. The only opposition to this was not from people who believed in racial equality, but from plantation owners who feared losing their cheap, brutalized labor force. And remarkably, the proposal had a few black supporters. They were black separatists who preferred a move to Africa over the violence and abuse that African Americans faced in Jim Crow Mississippi. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 21 was written by Senator Tory George McCallum, a former mayor of Laurel in Jones County. The county has achieved some measure of Hollywood fame as the Free State of Jones. It was a pocket of Unionist sentiment during the Civil War, but the McCallums were deeply engaged in the institution of slavery. Tory's grandfather, Archibald, enslaved 51 people on his plantation in 1860 and had a net worth of $80,000. That's about $2.5 million today. McCallum made clear that the spirit of race consciousness he cared about belonged to white people. The goal, he wrote, was, quote, that our country may become one in blood as it is in spirit, and that the dream of our forefathers may be realized in the final colonization of the American Negro on his native soil. The resolution does not specifically state whether the proposed mass migration would be voluntary, but its use of language like a final settlement, the final colonization, and the United States becoming one in blood makes clear the aim was total removal. Mississippi's black residents, who in the 1920 census made up 52% of the state's population, were not consulted in the process. During Reconstruction, Mississippi's black majority had sent 3 African Americans to Congress and more than 60 to the state legislature. That had all ended, though, first with rampant white violence in the 1870s and 1880s, then with the passage of a new state constitution in 1890 that effectively disenfranchised black people. Black newspapers nationwide mocked McCallum's proposal, just as African Americans had generally resisted the previous century's attempts at colonization. The Broad Axe, a black Chicago newspaper, wrote, quote, only one thing seems to have been overlooked by the honorable senator, and that is how even the Mississippi colored people will be induced or enabled by the Mississippi legislature to go to Africa. After generations of rape of enslaved women by white men, the intervening shades are so numerous and various, it may be a question to determine who is a colored person. Of course, such things don't bother McCallum. The Southern Indicator of Columbia, South Carolina wrote, quote, we see that representatives in Mississippi would colonize the American Negro in Africa. Poor fools. And they are still trying to get black people out of Mississippi. Look at the water situation down there. And you might recall that during that time, Mississippi's black population was over 52%. Today, it's around 30%. I wonder where the other 20% went.